At the center of this dark story were three individuals whose lives would become inextricably intertwined. Garrett Holloway, a skilled mechanic with calloused hands and an easy smile, was a fixture at Oakville Auto Repair. His wife, Tessa Holloway, was the town's most sought-after hairdresser, known for her vibrant personality and ability to transform even the most unruly manes into works of art at her salon. Rounding out this ill-fated trio was Aiden Caldwell, the charismatic yoga instructor who had recently moved to Oakville with his wife, opening a small studio that quickly became popular among the town's fitness enthusiasts. With his sculpted physique and soothing voice, Aiden seemed to embody the peace and balance he preached in his classes. On the surface, these three led lives that epitomized small-town American success. They were hard-working, well-liked members of the community, each playing their part in the intricate tapestry of Oakville's daily life. No one could have predicted the tempest that was brewing beneath this calm exterior. Garrett and Tessa's love story began like many in Oakville at the county fair on a warm summer evening. Garrett, then a 20-year-old apprentice mechanic with grease-stained hands and dreams of owning his own shop, was instantly smitten by the 18-year-old Tessa. Her infectious laugh and the way her honey-blonde hair caught the fairground lights made his heart skip a beat. Their courtship was a whirlwind of stolen kisses behind the Ferris wheel, long drives in Garrett's restored '67 Chevy, and promises of a future together. Tessa, who had always been fascinated by hair and beauty, enrolled in cosmetology school, while Garrett threw himself into his work, determined to climb the ranks at the auto shop. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn day, they exchanged vows in the town's quaint chapel. The entire community turned out to celebrate the union of two of its favorite young residents. Tessa looked radiant in a vintage lace gown, while Garrett beamed with pride, his work-worn hands gentle as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The early years of their marriage were filled with the typical struggles of a young couple. They lived in a small apartment above Mrs. Grunwald's antique shop, saving every penny for their dream home. Tessa worked long hours at the local salon, building her clientele, while Garrett took on extra shifts at the garage. Their hard work paid off. By their 5th anniversary, Garrett had been promoted to head mechanic, and Tessa had amassed enough loyal customers to open her own salon. They bought a modest bungalow on Maple Street, complete with a white picket fence and a sprawling backyard perfect for the family they hoped to start. From the outside, Garrett and Tessa seemed to have it all: successful careers, a loving marriage, and the respect of their community. Yet, as the years wore on, subtle cracks began to form in their picture-perfect life. Garrett's dedication to his work meant long hours at the shop, leaving Tessa increasingly alone. The children they had dreamed of never came, a silent source of disappointment that neither fully acknowledged. As they approached their 10th anniversary, Tessa found herself restless, yearning for something she couldn't quite name. Little did she know that this unnamed desire would lead her down a path that would ultimately end in tragedy. Aiden Caldwell's journey to Oakville was one of transformation and self-discovery. Born into a high-pressure family in Chicago, Aiden spent his early years trying to live up to his parents' expectations. He excelled in school, captained the swim team, and seemed destined for a lucrative career in finance, just like his father. But beneath the surface of his apparent success, Aiden felt hollow. The stress of conforming to others' expectations left him anxious and unfulfilled. It wasn't until his sophomore year of college that he discovered yoga, initially as a way to manage his stress. What started as a casual interest soon blossomed into a passion that would change the course of his life. Much to his parents' dismay, Aiden abandoned his business degree in his final year, instead pursuing yoga teacher training. He traveled to India, immersing himself in the philosophy and practice of yoga. It was there that he met Lena, a free-spirited artist from California, who was on her own journey of self-discovery. Aiden and Lena's connection was immediate and intense. They shared a vision of a life dedicated to wellness and creativity, far removed from the rat race of big city living. After a whirlwind romance, they married in a small ceremony on a Goa beach, their union blessed by a local guru. Returning to the States, the newlyweds decided to settle somewhere they could make a real impact. Oakville, with its lack of wellness-focused businesses, seemed like the perfect opportunity. They poured their savings into renovating an old warehouse into a yoga studio, with a small art gallery for Lena's work. Zen Flow Studio quickly became a hit in Oakville. Aiden's classes were always full, his calm demeanor and inspirational words drawing in a loyal following. Lena's vibrant paintings added color to the town's art scene, and the couple soon became well-respected members of the community. To all who knew them, Aiden and Lena appeared to be living their dream young, in love, and dedicated to bringing positive change to their adopted hometown. But even as Aiden guided his students toward inner peace, a restlessness stirred within him, a lingering doubt that would ultimately lead him to betray everything he claimed to believe in. As Tessa approached her mid-30s, a growing sense of dissatisfaction began to gnaw at her. The life she had built with Garrett, once a source of pride and contentment, now felt stifling. Their conversations had dwindled to discussions about bills and household chores. The passion that had once burned so brightly between them had faded to a barely flickering ember. In an attempt to recapture some spark in her life, Tessa decided to try something new. She had never been particularly athletic, but the buzz around town about the handsome yoga instructor at ZenFlow Studio piqued her curiosity. On a whim, she signed up for a beginner's class. From the moment Tessa stepped into the studio, she felt a shift in her energy. The soothing aroma of incense, the soft lighting, and the gentle sound of meditative music transported her to a world far removed from her daily routine. And then there was Aiden. As he guided the class through the poses, his voice calm and encouraging, Tessa found herself captivated. She watched the graceful way he moved, the strength and control in his body as he demonstrated each asana. When he came to adjust her position in downward dog, his touch sent a jolt of electricity through her body, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. After class, Aiden approached Tessa with a warm smile. He complimented her on her first attempt at yoga and encouraged her to keep practicing. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on topics beyond just yoga. Tessa found herself opening up about her life, her dreams, and her frustrations in a way she hadn't done with anyone in a long time. As the weeks passed, Tessa became a regular at ZenFlow. She looked forward to each class, not just for the physical benefits, but for those brief moments of connection with Aiden. She started paying more attention to her appearance before class, wearing her most flattering yoga pants and tops, applying a touch of mascara despite knowing she'd likely sweat it off. For his part, Aiden found himself increasingly drawn to Tessa. Her vulnerability and eagerness to learn touched something in him. He began to look forward to seeing her name on the class roster, to hearing her laugh at his corny yoga jokes. He told himself that his interest was purely that of a teacher for a promising student. But deep down, he knew it was more. The turning point came after a particularly intense class. Tessa had finally mastered a challenging pose she'd been struggling with for weeks. Caught up in the moment of triumph, she threw her arms around Aiden in a spontaneous hug. For a beat too long, they remained in each other's embrace, the air between them charged with unspoken desire. As Tessa pulled away, her eyes met Aiden's. In that moment, they both recognized the dangerous territory they were entering. Yet neither had the strength, or perhaps the will to step back from the precipice. That night, as Tessa lay awake next to a snoring Garrett, and Aiden stared at the ceiling while Lena slept peacefully beside him, they both knew that a line had been crossed. There was no going back now, only forward into the unknown, exhilarating and treacherous terrain of forbidden love. The affair between Tessa and Aiden blossomed in the shadows, nurtured by stolen moments and whispered promises. They became masters of deception, crafting elaborate alibis and finding creative ways to carve out time together. Their first clandestine meeting occurred under the guise of a private yoga session. Tessa told Garrett she was treating herself to some one-on-one instruction to improve her form. In reality, the only poses they explored that afternoon were decidedly not part of any traditional yoga practice. The thrill of finally giving in to their desires, combined with the fear of discovery, made their encounter electric. As weeks turned into months, Tessa and Aiden's relationship deepened. They met in out-of-the-way cafes 2 towns over, booked into nondescript motels using cash, and even once daringly rendezvoused in the supply closet of Tessa's salon after hours. Each encounter left them craving more, their appetite for each other seemingly insatiable. Between their secret trysts, they communicated via a messaging app that Tessa had installed on a burner phone hidden in her salon. Aiden would send her poetic musings about her beauty, while Tessa responded with flirtatious messages that made him blush even as he taught his classes. The affair injected a new vitality into both their lives. Tessa found herself humming as she styled her client's hair, her movements more graceful, her smile more radiant. Her renewed zest for life didn't go unnoticed. Her regular customers commented on her glow, assuming she had finally found the right skincare routine. Aiden, too, seemed to have an extra spring in his step. His yoga classes became more dynamic and inspired, drawing even more students to ZenFlow. Lena remarked on his improved mood, attributing it to the success of their business. But maintaining their secret wasn't without its challenges. There were close calls that left them both shaken. Once, Garrett nearly walked in on them at the salon, stopping by unexpectedly to drop off Tessa's forgotten lunch. They managed to make it look like an innocent yoga demonstration, but the near miss left them both trembling. Another time, one of Lena's art students swore she saw Aiden and Tessa holding hands at a cafe in the next town. Aiden laughed it off, saying the student must have mistaken someone else for him, but the incident left him paranoid for weeks. As time went on, the weight of their deception began to take its toll. Tessa found herself snapping at Garrett over minor issues, her guilt manifesting as irritation. Aiden struggled to maintain his serene demeanor during his classes, his teachings about honesty and integrity now feeling hollow. Despite these pressures, neither Tessa nor Aiden could bring themselves to end the affair. They had become addicted to each other, to the passion and excitement that had been missing from their marriages. In quiet moments, they fantasized about a future together, though neither dared to speak these dreams aloud. Their relationship existed in a bubble, separate from the realities of their daily lives. In this secret world, they were not Tessa the hairdresser and Aiden the yoga instructor, bound by matrimonial vows and societal expectations. They were simply two souls who had found in each other a connection they had thought lost to them. But bubbles, no matter how beautiful, are fragile things. As spring turned to summer in Oakville, events were set in motion that would burst their idyllic fantasy, bringing their affair crashing down with consequences more dire than either could have imagined. The day of reckoning was approaching, and with it, a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. As the affair between Tessa and Aiden approached its first anniversary, the cracks in their carefully constructed secret world began to widen. The initial thrill of their forbidden romance had started to wane, replaced by a growing sense of unease and the weight of their deception. Aiden, in particular, found himself increasingly consumed by guilt. The principles of honesty and integrity that he espoused in his yoga classes felt like a mockery of his actions. Each time he looked into Lena's trusting eyes, or saw her smile with pride at the success of their studio, he felt a twist of shame in his gut. One evening, after a particularly intense lovemaking session with Tessa in a motel on the outskirts of town, Aiden broke down. Tears streaming down his face, he confessed to Tessa that he couldn't continue living a lie. He spoke of the toll it was taking on his mental health, how he felt he was betraying not just Lena, but also his students, and everything he claimed to stand for. Tessa, caught off guard by Aiden's emotional outburst, tried to comfort him. She whispered soothing words, reminding him of their love and the connection they shared. But as she held him, a cold fear gripped her heart. The thought of losing Aiden, of returning to the monotony of her life with Garrett, was unbearable. In the days that followed, Aiden became distant. He canceled their planned meetings, citing various excuses. His messages, once filled with passion and longing, became short and infrequent. Tessa could feel him slipping away, and desperation began to cloud her judgment. It was during this tumultuous time that Tessa made a fatal mistake. In a moment of anger and fear, she sent Aiden a message threatening to expose their affair if he left her. She spoke of telling Lena everything, of revealing their trysts to the entire town. In her panic, she even mentioned going to Garrett, framing the affair as Aiden taking advantage of her vulnerability. The moment she hit send, Tessa regretted her words. She tried to backtrack, sending a flurry of apologetic messages, but the damage was done. Aiden's response was cold and final. "We need to talk, in person, no more games." They agreed to meet at their usual spot, a secluded clearing in the woods outside of town. As Tessa drove there, her mind raced with ways to salvage the situation. She would apologize, beg for forgiveness if necessary. She would promise to give him space, to keep their relationship platonic, if that's what he wanted. Anything to keep Aiden in her life. But Aiden had made his decision. The threat of exposure had crystallized something in him. As he waited for Tessa in the clearing, his mind clouded with fear and desperation, he convinced himself that there was only one way to ensure his secret remained buried. As the sun began to set over Oakville, casting long shadows through the trees, Aiden steeled himself for what he was about to do. The man who had once preached nonviolence and inner peace was preparing to commit an act that would shatter multiple lives and rock the entire community to its core. In the fading light of the secluded clearing, Aiden paced back and forth, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The peace and serenity he had cultivated over years of yoga practice had abandoned him, replaced by a primal fear of losing everything he had built. Tessa's threat of exposure echoed in his head, drowning out the voice of reason that pleaded with him to find another way. As he heard the crunch of tires on gravel announcing Tessa's arrival, Aiden made his final decision. He could not allow her to destroy his life, his marriage, his career. In his panicked state, he convinced himself that silencing Tessa permanently was his only option. With shaking hands, Aiden retrieved a coil of rope from his car trunk. He had brought it under the pretense of demonstrating some advanced yoga techniques, but its true purpose now weighed heavily in his grip. He took several deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart, as he heard Tessa's footsteps approaching through the underbrush. Tessa emerged into the clearing, her face a mixture of anxiety and hope. She began to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush of apologies and pleas. But Aiden barely heard her. His vision had narrowed, focused solely on the task he had set for himself. In one fluid motion, born from years of physical training, Aiden moved behind Tessa. Before she could react, he had looped the rope around her neck. Her eyes widened in shock and confusion, her apologies turning to desperate gasps as Aiden tightened his grip. The struggle was brief but intense. Tessa clawed at the rope, her nails leaving bloody trails on her own neck as she fought for air. Aiden closed his eyes, unable to watch, as the life drained from the woman he had once claimed to love. He maintained his hold until Tessa's struggles ceased, and her body went limp in his arms. As the reality of what he had done crashed over him, Aiden felt a wave of nausea. He lowered Tessa's body to the ground, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The peaceful clearing, once a sanctuary for their illicit meetings, had now become the scene of an unthinkable crime. Aiden's mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. He knew he needed to dispose of the body and create an alibi. With mechanical movements, he wrapped Tessa's body in a yoga mat he had brought, struggling to lift her into the trunk of his car. As he drove away from the clearing, Aiden's thoughts were a chaotic jumble of fear, guilt, and self-justification. He had killed to keep his secret, but in doing so, he had created an even darker one. Little did he know that his attempts to cover up his crime would soon unravel, leading to his downfall and forever changing the quiet town of Oakville. The grim task of disposing of Tessa's body weighed heavily on Aiden as he drove through the outskirts of Oakville. His mind, once filled with teachings of karma and cosmic balance, now raced with panicked thoughts of self-preservation. He decided to head towards the old quarry, a desolate area rarely frequented by locals. As he navigated the winding roads, each bump and turn caused a sickening thud from the trunk, a stark reminder of his horrific act. Aiden's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror, paranoid that he was being followed. Arriving at the quarry, Aiden parked his car behind a cluster of large boulders, shielding it from the main road. The night was moonless, the darkness both a blessing and a curse, as he struggled to maneuver Tessa's body from the trunk. The yoga mat, once a symbol of his peaceful profession, now served as a macabre shroud. Aiden dragged the wrapped body towards the edge of the quarry, his muscles straining under the weight. Sweat mingled with tears on his face as he realized the finality of what he was about to do. With a last, desperate heave, he pushed Tessa's body over the edge, watching as it tumbled down the rocky slope and disappeared into the murky waters below. The splash echoed in the stillness of the night, seeming to Aiden like an accusation from the universe itself. He stood there for a long moment, his breath coming in ragged gasps, before the fear of discovery spurred him into action once more. Returning to his car, Aiden meticulously cleaned any traces of dirt or evidence. He changed into fresh clothes he had brought, stuffing his soiled garments into a plastic bag. As a final precaution, he scattered the area with yoga pamphlets and a water bottle, staging it to look like he had simply been scouting a location for an outdoor class. The drive back to town was a blur. Aiden's mind raced, constructing alibis and scenarios to explain Tessa's disappearance. He knew he would need to act normal, to return home to Lena and pretend that this night had been like any other. As he pulled into his driveway, Aiden took a final deep breath, steeling himself for the performance of his life. He plastered a serene smile on his face, the same one he used to greet his yoga students, and walked into his house. Lena was still awake, working on a painting in her studio. She looked up as Aiden entered, her face lighting up with a smile that now felt like a dagger in his heart. "How long ago was I scouting locations for that new sunrise yoga class?" he asked casually, his voice surprisingly steady. Lena's response about the beautiful quarry view was drowned out by the roaring in Aiden's ears, as the reality of his actions truly began to sink in. As he lay in bed that night, Lena sleeping peacefully beside him, Aiden stared at the ceiling, the weight of his crime pressing down on him like a physical force. He had taken a life, betrayed everything he believed in, and set in motion a chain of events that would soon come crashing down around him. The once peaceful yoga instructor had become a murderer, and Oakville would never be the same. The disappearance of Tessa Holloway sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Oakville. When she failed to show up for work at her salon 2 days in a row, Concern quickly turned to alarm. Garrett, frantic with worry, reported her missing to the local police department. Detective Olivia Reeves, a seasoned investigator recently transferred from a larger city, took charge of the case. Her first step was to interview Garrett, who appeared genuinely distraught. He recounted their last conversation, a mundane discussion about grocery shopping, and swore that nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. As news of Tessa's disappearance spread, the townspeople rallied to help. Search parties combed the areas around Oakville, while flyers with Tessa's photo appeared in shop windows and on telephone poles. The local newspaper ran daily updates, and a hotline was set up for tips. Detective Reeves and her team methodically worked through Tessa's known associates. They interviewed her salon clients, friends, and family members. Most described Tessa as happy and content, though a few mentioned that she had seemed distracted lately, almost giddy at times. One breakthrough came when Tessa's assistant at the salon mentioned that Tessa had been attending yoga classes regularly. This led the investigators to Zen Flow Studio and to Aidan Caldwell. Aidan, maintaining a calm exterior that belied his inner turmoil, confirmed that Tessa had been a student, but claimed he hadn't seen her since her last class nearly a week ago. As the investigation progressed, Detective Reeves noticed small inconsistencies in various statements. Garrett mentioned that Tessa had been going to yoga almost daily, yet the studio's sign-in sheets showed less frequent attendance. Phone records indicated a high volume of text to a number that turned out to be a burner phone, untraceable. A canvass of local motels turned up evidence that a couple matching Tessa and Aidan's description had been frequent guests. The motel owner couldn't positively identify them, but remembered the woman's distinctive laugh and the man's yoga mat. 2 weeks into the investigation, a hiker made a grim discovery at the old quarry. Caught in some reeds was a yoga mat containing a body later identified as Tessa's. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. This discovery shifted the missing person case into a homicide investigation. Detective Reeves and her team redoubled their efforts, re-interviewing key witnesses and scrutinizing every piece of evidence. Aidan, realizing the net was closing in, struggled to maintain his composure. His once immaculate yoga classes became erratic, his teachings disjointed. Lena noticed his distraction, but attributed it to stress over Tessa's death, unaware of her husband's terrible secret. As the police built their case, small details began to paint a damning picture. Fibers found on Tessa's body matched the rope used in Aidan's aerial yoga classes. Soil samples from his car trunk were consistent with the quarry site. Most damning of all, a student came forward with a photo taken the night of Tessa's disappearance, showing Aidan's car near the quarry. Detective Reeves, sensing Aidan was close to breaking, brought him in for another round of questioning. Under the detective's relentless interrogation, Aidan's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His yoga-trained control faltered, his answers became contradictory, and his serene mask slipped to reveal the terrified man beneath. As the evidence mounted and his lies unraveled, Aidan realized the futility of further denial. In a moment of resignation, with Detective Reeves watching intently, Aidan buried his face in his hands. His next words would shock the community and bring a tragic end to the investigation. "I did it. I killed Tessa." After just 4 hours, they returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. As the judge sentenced Aidan Caldwell to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through Oakville. The nightmare that had gripped the town for months was finally over, but the scars it left would take years to heal.